All right, let's talk about Chapter 15, dose limits for exposure to ionizing radiation. We have different kind of organizations, radiation protection standard organizations. We have the NCRP, our national organization, our ICRP, our international organization, the NRC, which is our nuclear organization, and our National Academy of Sciences, as well as of our regulatory organizations, the EPA, the FDA, and OSHA. Recommendation organizations. ICRP, again, is the International Commission of Radiologic Protection, the National Council of Radiation Protection and Measurement, the NCRP, the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSEER, and the National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council Committee on the Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation. Again, NAS is National Academy of Sciences, and then we have our NRC, National Research Council on BEIR, biological effects of ionizing radiation, and we'll use that term quite a bit for the rest of the lecture. ICRP, International Commission on Radiologic Protection, was created in 1928. It is the international authority on the safe use of ionizing radiation. It provides clear and consistent radiation protection recommendations for occupational dose limits, public dose limits, and it does not enforce rules, it only makes recommendations. The National Council of Radiation Protection is a U.S. agency founded in 1964. It reviews recommendations of IRCP and determines how to incorporate it into U.S. radiation protection. This council formulates general recommendations, publishes their recommendations in forms of NCRP reports. Not an enforcement agency, enforcement is charged to federal and state agencies like FDA and EPA. United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSEER, was established in 1955. It evaluates radiation exposure from sources to include radioactive material, radiation-producing machines, radiation accidents, uses data to find conclusions on radiation risk assessment for cancer and genetic effects. The National Academy of Science, National Research Council, Committee on the Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation, the NAS or NRC BEIR. These groups review studies of biological effects of ionizing radiation and risk assessment. They formulated a report called the BEIR, the BEIR 5 report in 1990, and it studied the health effects of exposure to low level of ionizing radiation. Radiation protection organizations. These organizations listed make recommendations for effective dose and equivalent doses. Based on these recommendations, limits on radiation exposure can be created by acts of Congress or state laws. National and state agencies are charged with enforcing these standards. Recommendation organization charts. So this is just a checkpoint slide, a summary slide from the last 4 recommendation organizations. Again, those organizations, ICRP, functions, evaluates information on biological effects of radiation and provides radiation protection guidelines through general recommendations of occupational and public dose limits. The NCRP, National Council of Radiation Protection, reviews regulations formulated by the ICRP and decides ways to include these recommendations in U.S. radiation protection criteria. The United Nations Science Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSEER, evaluates human environmental ionizing radiation exposure and derives radiation risk assessment from epidemiologic data and research conclusions, provides information to organizations such as the ICRP for evaluation. The National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council Committee on the Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation, the NAS NRC BEIR, reviews studies of biologic effects of ionizing radiation and risk assessment, and provides the information to organizations such as the ICRP for evaluation. So again, we have 2 international organizations, ICRP and UNSEER. We have 2 regional ones or national ones, the NCRP and the NAS NRC BEIR. Regulatory organizations. These would be the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, agreement states, Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. The NRC, formerly the Atomic Energy Committee, agency that has the power to enforce radiation protection standards, does not regulate or inspect X-ray imaging facilities. The main function is to oversee nuclear energy industries, including nuclear medicine. The NRC also controls the manufacture and use of radioactive substances. Again, that's nuclear medicine. That's the modality. Agreement states NRC can enter into contracts with state governments. These contracts allow the state to take the responsibility of licensing and regulating the use of radioactive materials and use of radioisotopes within the state. Texas is an agreement state, so enforcing radiation protection regulation falls on the Health Department. The Texas Department of State Health Services information can be found on the Texas Department of Health website. State inspectors are sent to facilities to determine compliance with rules and regulations regarding radiation safety. Individual states also may choose to have their own regulations for radiation safety. In non-agreement states, both the state and the NRC jointly enforce radiation protection regulations. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. It was established in 1970 by President Nixon. As it pertains to radiation, development and enforcement of regulations concerning radiation in the environment. So that would be radon. That would be the largest part or contributor to natural background radiation. The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, deals with product radiation control, regulating the design and manufacturing of radiation products. FDA conducts inspections of mammography units. FDA ensures protection of individuals from faulty manufacturing. The FDA supports the concept that each patient should get the right imaging examination at the right time with the right radiation dose. The FDA intends to take action to promote safe usage of medical imaging devices, support informed clinical decisions, increase patient awareness. The goal is to optimize patient exposure to radiation from certain types of medical exams and thereby reducing related risks when maximizing the benefits of these studies. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. OSHA regulates occupational exposure. Employees can notify OSHA if they feel that they are being told to operate under unsafe conditions. Employees have the right to know what hazards they may be in contact with. Checkpoint slide, summary slide, regulatory organization charts. Remember, we talked about recommendation organizations. Now these are regulatory organizations. Again, the NRC oversees the nuclear energy industry, enforces radiation protection standards, publishes its rules and regulations in Title 10 of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, and enters into written agreements with state government that permit the state to license and regulate the use of radioisotopes and certain other materials within that state. Agreement states like Texas enforce radiation protection regulations through their respective health departments, so through the state departments. The EPA facilitates the development and enforcement of regulations pertaining to the control of radiation in the environment. The FDA conducts an ongoing product radiation control program, regulating the design and manufacture of electronic products, including X-ray equipment. OSHA functions as a monitoring agency in place of employment, predominantly in industry. Now let's go into radiation safety programs. The NRC mandates a radiation safety committee be established for each facility, provide guidance for radiation safety programs and its continual operation. A radiation safety officer elected to oversee programs' daily operations, provides informal review of the program each year. Again, the RSO, usually a medical physicist, health physicist, radiologist, or other qualified individuals through training and experience. So the radiation safety program basically makes sure that we have all the documents of our equipment, that it's inspected annually by a physicist, that we have all our Landau reports, and everyone who works as an X-ray tech has their license on file. RSO responsibilities, again, helps develop appropriated radiation safety programs that follow accepted guidelines for radiation protection, ensuring all, especially those who could be pregnant or protected from unnecessary exposure, authority to implement and enforce policies or radiation protection, review and maintain radiation monitoring records for all personnel, provide counseling to individuals who receive high readings. Radiation Control for Health and Safety Act of 1968. So this act, it was to protect public from hazards of unnecessary radiation from electronic products such as microwaves and color televisions. Diagnostic X-ray equipment was also included. The diagnostic X-ray beam must always be filtered. This act allowed for establishment of the Center for Devices in Radiologic Health, the CDRH. It sets standards for manufacturing, installing, assembly, and maintenance of machines for radiologic procedures. It assesses biological effects of ionizing radiation, the BEIR, evaluates radiation emissions from electronic products in general, just like on your cell phone has an SAR, which is the absorption rate, conducting research to reduce radiation exposure. The Public Law 9602 from Safety Act of 1968, the Code of Standards for Diagnostic X-ray Equipment. So the equipment must have an automatic limitation of radiographic beam, PBL. This was mainly enforced in the 1990s. Not really enforced today, but most manufacturers still add this equipment in there. Appropriate permanent filtration of X-ray beam, ability of X-ray units to duplicate certain exposures, reproducibility, and linearity. Presence of beam on indicators, both visual and audible, also when exposure is terminated. So that's the light outside the door that turns on when an exposure is being made. It's the sound that the machine makes when exposure is being made. Manual backup timers to ensure terminate of exposure in AEC systems. The Consumer Patient Radiation Health and Safety Act of 1981, Title IX of Public Law 9735, established minimal standards for accreditation of educational programs for persons who administer radiographic procedures and the certification of such persons. This was to ensure that medical dental procedures are consistent with safety precautions and standards. No penalty exists for state non-compliance. So again, there are a lot of laws in place, but according to this, no penalty exists for non-state compliance. It just depends on how the state enforces it. So we have regulations for the equipment. We also have regulations for the technicians as well. Let's talk about the current radiation protection philosophy. Genetic and somatic responses to ionizing radiation were considered in developing the presence of effective dose limiting recommendations. So not equivalent dose, but make sure that you know it's the effective dose limiting. Current radiation protection philosophy is based on an LNT, linear non-threshold relationship. A straight line from the zero mark right here. Again, y-axis, z-axis starts from 0. Linear non-threshold. Any dose can cause a response. Ionizing radiation possesses a beneficial potential. The benefits must outweigh the risk. So, is the X-ray worth getting the radiation dosage? Many conflicting views exist on assessing the risk of cancer from low-level radiation exposure. The trend has been to create more rigorous radiation protection standards. The adoption of the effective dose limiting system is a direct consequence of this conservatism. Radiographers are considered reasonably safe occupation compared to other industries. Again, not equivalent dose, but effective dose limiting system. It assesses the radiation exposure and biological effects. and that is for radiation workers and the general public. Current National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurement and recommendations. We have different reports. The main ones that we'll cover in this lecture is NCRP report number 116 and report number 184. Report number 184 is the most current one, but a lot of our limits, effective dose limits, come from report number 116. The National Council of Radiation Protection and Measurement reports, and CRP updates its position on radiation protection and publishes recommendations periodically. The NCRP report number 184 is the current recommendation on dose exposure limits. The previous report 116 is still enforced. Cumulative effective dose. Radiation worker's lifetime dose must be limited to his or her age in years multiplied by 10 MSV. This does not include radiation from natural background radiation. It does not include exposure acquired from undergoing personal medical imaging procedures. So again, the formula you need to know for the next exam for the cumulative effective dose would be just 10 millisieverts multiplied by age in years, not by years of experience, but by age in years. Annual dose limits occupational. For individuals that work in and around radiation, the effective dose limit is 50 millisieverts for occupational exposed persons. There are talks to reduce dose limits to 20 millisieverts, but it has not been acted on by NCRP. So we're still going with 50 millisieverts for X-ray techs. Annual dose limits general population. There are two that you need to know for this slide. This is for non-occupational infrequent exposure to individuals. Examples that you'll need to know would be persons who accompany a patient to imaging departments, such as a spouse who may help hold the patient, a parent of a child patient, a guardian of the patient. So the dose would be 5 millisieverts for infrequent exposure compared to 1 millisievert for frequent exposures. The annual dose limits pregnant radiation workers are very important to control exposures to unborn babies. The NRCP recommends a monthly equivalent dose not to exceed 0.5 millisieverts per month to the embryo fetus. There is a limit of 5 millisieverts during the entire pregnancy for the tech. So remember, 5 millisieverts for the entire 9 months of pregnancy, or 0.5 millisieverts per month for the embryo fetus. Annual dose limits, education and training purposes. For individuals under the age of 18, 1 millisievert annually for those ages under 18 for training and educational purposes. Annual dose limits for tissue organs, 150 millisieverts to the lens of the eye, 500 millisieverts for areas of the skin, hands, and feet. So the skin, hands, and feet would mainly, if you think about the surgeons in the operating rooms who are always near the C-arms. Checkpoint slide, summary slide, dose limit chart. This is from the NCRP report number 116. Again, cumulative effective dose, age times 10 millisieverts. Make sure you know the units. Annual occupational dose, 50 millisieverts. General population, 5 millisieverts. Pregnant worker, 5 millisieverts. Embryo fetus, 0.5 millisieverts per month. Students, 1 millisievert. Lens of the eye, 150 millisieverts. Scan, hands, and feet, 500 millisieverts. I also put the rem in there, or millirems, just because that's how it shows up in your Landau reports. The registry will ask you everything in SI units and millisieverts. Let's talk about negligible individual dose. The dose that a reduction of individual exposure is unnecessary. This is needed to provide a low exposure cutoff level for regulatory agencies. 0.01 millisieverts a year is considered a negligible individual dose. If we were to refer to this on your Landau report, it would be like an M on your Landauer showing it's a minor dose, not a major dose. It's negligible, meaning it's not worth worrying about. Let's talk about action limits. This is a term used by hospitals to indicate the limit that triggers an investigation. In facilities, it is common to see this limit set at 1/10 of the maximum effective dose. The RSO can utilize corrective actions. So again, as a student, if you go over 1 millisievert per year, then the RSO can will talk to you, do an investigation, and figure out what we need to do to change that. So most likely, a student left a badge outside in their car, or for some reason got too much radiation. Maybe they left their badge in the floral area, or they were doing too many surgeries. So in that case, the RSO would create an action plan, kind of like a remediation to where that student wouldn't go to surgery or any kind of floral areas for a while until their dose gets back to normal. Radiation hormesis. This is the benefit to continual exposure to small amounts of radiation. It contradicts the L&T model. Several studies have were done to show symptoms to low levels of radiation exposure. It initiates adaptive protective responses that can lessen DNA damage. And that's it for today. Thank you guys. Bye.